Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's a Ukrainian show on POT TV. My name is Sasha Star, and our today's guest is Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here as always.
Okay, so we are living now in a way that the war in Europe is being escalated.
Yes,
No
I
doubt
fully,
about that.
absolutely.
In that case, Jonathan, I think it's very important just come back a little bit to talk about Article 5 of NATO, which is a cornerstone of not only the military ability of the Europe to sustain Russian aggression, but also a political situation where all countries involved from European side, minus Ukraine, are relying on Article 5. And if that's something what really works, then it's good enough, something to rely on and conduct their policies and other decision making activities in a certain way. I've looked very carefully at Article 5, what it is, and I don't want to spend anybody's time on reading all the Article 5. It's the language is very uncertain, to say the least.
Part of that
However,
was, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, what's important is that I've did some more digging into it. And what I'd like to point out is that at the drafting of Article 5 at the late 1940s, there was consensus on the principle of mutual assistance, but fundamental disagreement on the modalities of implementing this commitment. The European participants wanted to ensure that the United States would automatically come to their assistance should one of the signatories come under attack. The United States did not want to make such a pledge and obtained that this will be reflected in the wording of Article 5. I don't know if people are aware of that, but what's important is that if United States are not automatically assisting the country or group of countries under attack from Russia, for example, that means that there could be a scenario where, let's see, United States don't think that it's an act of war, and it doesn't warrant of U.S. to come to the help of any country or countries. Does it mean that, for example, if Poland is attacked by Russians, let's not consider attack as tanks are roaring on the Poland territory. Let's imagine that instead of 19 or so drones, there will be 190 drones. And as you know, Ukraine has been bombarded by hundreds of drones every night. So let's see if, say, around 200 drones are venturing on Poland territory. Uh, so if I don't know, it triggers Article 5 or it's not. Now, if it does trigger Article 5, US automatically comes to the assistance to Poland, or maybe other countries will come to the assistance of Poland. Say Spain, for example. Would Spain send their divisions to defend Poland? Jonathan, what do you think about this?
This is an intriguing question, Sasha. It really is because back then they were talking about that. They were really the idea behind NATO was to use. Keep in mind the especially in the 50s, the U.S. Strategic doctrine then under Dulles and Eisenhower was a massive retaliation. In other words, relying on U.S. invulnerability to nuclear attack to be able to threaten massive retaliation against the Soviet Union itself in case of aggression against NATO. That was the implicit deterrent threat that NATO relied upon. And now what you have now with the in the post-Cold War period, now you have a situation, especially with the emergence of drone technology, where essentially now Putin, as unbelievable maybe sound, may be trying to threaten or intimidate by small measures, testing, by using drones in combination with the fortuitous timing of the Zapad 25 military exercise with between Russia and Belarus. Now, the concern during the Cold War was that such a military exercise, the NATO intelligence was especially careful to watch that exercise very carefully, because that exercise could easily, as it approached the border, by Russian direction, they could simply continue on into NATO territory, use that and just continue on with the exercise into a real war. That was a genuine concern for NATO during that time. So they always.
You know what? Russians could playfully explain that for these exercises there was not enough territory, so they used
They need to use some more
territory Poland just for exercises.
Yeah, we're just going to exercise in your. We promise we'll pull back. Oh, sure, yeah.
In time, maybe 2 years later. Maybe.
Yeah, we'll pull back after. Yeah, exactly. That's the danger of this kind of situation. So right now, but of course, for Russia, this could be a very empty bluff, because as we have been able to see thus far during the Ukrainian war, the Russians have been taking exorbitant casualties and not really decisively defeating Ukraine at all. As a matter of fact, as I've contended, and you and I pretty much agree, the Russians are pretty much stalemated in Ukraine right now, and taking exorbitant losses and absorbing a lot of damage to their economy and their ability to continue to make war. And for the Russians to threaten to, right now, I can't see the current use of drones as anything more than a test, a provocation to see how much NATO will in fact react. So I think what they are he is trying to gauge how serious NATO is, in being willing to risk widening the war in order to react forcefully to a Russian provocation or even an exercise. So this is a crucial test, and Poland, for its part, is reacting quite logically and quite forcefully. And the Russians may discover that the Poles aren't any easier to fight than the Ukrainians. So no. They may get themselves. Also keep in mind that Russia did not expect that NATO itself would respond by admitting Finland and Sweden into its membership, thus broadening the territory that borders Russia itself. So they have made a series of serious miscalculations thus far, and I would contend that this latest thing of sending drones, whether deliberate or accidental, is definitely a mistake on Russia's part, because it's only going to further galvanize the NATO members into recognizing that Russia is indeed a genuine threat that is not going to let up until they have achieved their objectives, or until Putin dies and someone of somewhat more logical, reasonable mindset takes his place and says, "Okay, let's declare victory and go home." And but in any case, right now it is important for there to be a strong response on not just on Poland's part, but the NATO members have to get together behind Poland and respond forcefully, certainly with sanctions, and also the United States, as they're observing this, they are being, shall we say, reluctantly pushed into a more forceful response. And given the dynamic of events that are taking place right now, it is more important than ever that the United States eventually, not just brush this off as just an unimportant little provocation, but a test to see how forcefully the United States and the West are going to react. So, but this exercise should be watched very carefully. And
Okay. What I'd like to mention is you just mentioned Sweden just a while ago. You see, the all European countries, they have their own way for different reasons, differently to react to the situation. For example, Finland, which borders Russia, and Russia already makes claims against Finland of all kinds. Now, Sweden does not have a border with Russia.
right.
And Sweden is a quite strong industrial country. They've made a pledge of $7.5 billion to Ukraine, also providing their absolutely top systems. I'm talking about the military systems of all
Yes.
kinds to Ukraine.
Mhm.
Now, the Chancellor Merz said that NATO or Europe can no longer rely on the defense from United States. So it's all now in the hands of Europe. That's very interesting because the way European armies are today, no one, and even all of them together, may not be able to withstand against Russia, except one thing. If Ukraine is becoming part of this Western coalition, then Russia will be gone and very quickly. Because Ukraine alone, for 3.5 years, if not more, they already very successfully resisting Russian attacks. And if Ukraine would have help or being acting together with the rest of European countries, Russians would be gone. There is nothing for them to do in
Right.
Ukraine.
They would be forced. They would be eventually forced to retreat because
Absolutely.
they wouldn't even be able to hold their current positions. And you also notice that the Ukraine has been successfully counterattacking in the east and taking back territory. Yeah, mind you, it's not just it's not huge amount of territory yet, but it's certainly a definite change in Ukraine's favor. And Russia is not able to effectively respond. And whatever aid that Russia is getting from North Korea or China, and it's not going to match the quality of what the Western European countries can provide to
Together
Ukraine.
with Ukraine
Right.
alone, I don't think that they will be able to provide anything.
No.
Today, in my opinion, Ukrainian army is superior to German, French, and the UK put together.
Yeah, if for no other reason, Sasha, in that the Ukrainian army is battle tested.
Absolutely.
It is thoroughly battle tested and experienced. It's the most experienced army. It's the most experienced army there, besides that of Russia. And Russia's problem is that a lot of their army is dead.
Yeah,
So
a lot. Yeah.
yes, every time they send new troops in to get experience, they get killed. So
Yeah.
so it's not much help for them. So right now, Russia is steadily exhausting itself. The Europeans are steadily, if they're reluctantly, but definitely increasing their defense expenditures.
Yeah.
Ukraine is very successfully innovating and building up its defense structure, its defense industry, and doing so all while under attack, which is just absolutely amazing. And right now, it's again the decisive moment that you and I both are hoping for and anticipating, and have confidence that the Ukrainian military is watching for that opportunity. They may, in fact, be able to even launch that moment while the Russians and the Belarusians are engaged in an exercise. Now that would cut their exercise short real fast, and particularly if the Ukrainians launch a successful counterattack that isolates the Crimea. And you notice that there have been several preparatory moves that the Ukraine has undertaken against the Russian occupiers in Crimea, steadily eliminating their air defense systems, steadily attacking their logistics, and showing that they say again.
Oil refineries.
Oil refineries, all those things that are crucial for Russia to be able to maintain its offensive against Ukraine. And if they can successfully make that final attack that destroys the Kerch Bridge, that will sever the logistical and reinforcement link between Russia and Crimea. That will be the decisive element. That will be the decisive step that needs to be taken prior to a counteroffensive that retakes Crimea.
Or together with the counteroffensive. Now, interesting question is that when in the skies of Poland, all of these Russian drones were liquidated.
Yes.
Now, Russia did not consider that to be act of war because it was all Russian drones and all of them were being liquidated. And nothing really happened. Why there are restrictions on Europeans to act together with Ukraine to destroy drones and the missiles that are coming into Ukraine, also to be liquidated in Ukrainian sky? Why would that be considered by Russia an act of war, act of aggression, act of anything? Okay, I understand the airplanes having the live pilots. That could be considered a little bit more hostile act, although if you remember a few years ago, Turkey destroyed Russian aircraft and pilot was killed when they were in the airspace of Turkey. So in all these drones and missiles without pilots are in the skies of Ukraine, why Western Europe would not help Ukraine, even if they would cover only western part of Ukraine? So then a lot of Ukrainian defense systems could be relocated to the center and east of Ukraine and being more effective. Why is it not happening?
That is a fascinating question, because if they follow your logic, is that there is no reason for them not to react more forcefully to strengthen Ukrainian air defense. It may be for them a matter of priority of defense, priority of what to protect, because they don't have enough resources necessarily to give equal air defense protection or ballistic missile defense protection to all of Ukraine, but they do have priority areas that they try to protect. So, given that, it just simply may be a question of resource allocation. Now, if the United States, as I mentioned in a previous show, they have authorized Lockheed Martin to produce 3,000 Patriot missiles, which is quite substantial, and short of going to full wartime production, which is what going beyond that would mean, that would be a substantial boost, especially if the majority of those missiles go to Ukraine. So right now, it's a question of resource allocation. Get the political will and saying, okay, we're in this for the long haul until Russia is forced to abandon its aggression. And it's a shame that the political leadership is not more decisive in doing this. But if Russia keeps up these provocations, such as the Zapad 25 exercise or sending drones in to test, NATO's reaction, well, then they may get more of a reaction than they bargained for.
You see this mission of Russian drones over Poland, there are two tests. One is military, how well for example, Poland could deal with such an attack in the future, and if it will be not 20 drones, but it will be 200 drones or so. And another test is a political will of Poland and Western allies. So there are two purposes of that. So remember, I think in one of the programs I said how carefully Putin tests the what's available, how far he can go unpunished, starting with Georgia in 2008 and Crimea, and now this horrible war against Ukraine. So he's testing, and his tests, to him at least, are quite satisfactory.
You notice there's an interesting historical parallel here, Sasha, between what Putin is doing and what Hitler did in the 1930s, diplomatically, starting the reoccupation of the Rhineland in 1936. I mean, and Hitler was prepared to full retreat if the West reacted in any way. But the West did not react, and so he undertook more incremental things. The Anschluss, the reunification of Germany with Austria, and all those other. He kept on pushing, and the West kept retreating and accommodating, culminating really the maximum success he had before the West finally said enough was, of course, the Munich Agreement in 1938.
Yep.
But it was when Germany started making demands on Poland, ironically enough, that was when Great Britain and France said, "Okay, enough. We're declaring war." But up to that time, Hitler had been, through diplomatic means and military pressure and making demands, he had been getting everything his own way, and the West simply did not react forcefully. Now you're seeing this parallel playing out with Russia in the 21st century. And it's, again, starting with all those things that you talked about, beginning in 2008. Putin began pushing and using subversion and sending in the military, illegally seizing Crimea, all of those things, and the West did not react. And because the West did not react, he just kept pushing until finally he decided, when there was no reaction to this, he thought it was safe to invade Ukraine, and he thought that he would have a quick victory, and he was proven disastrously wrong. So now we have a situation which parallels the situation that you've described, parallels in many ways the situation that between Hitler and the West in the 1930s, where Hitler won a string of diplomatic victories.
You see, John, I would like to mention, and you in your position will appreciate that for sure, that all these political doctrines, they cannot be always reliable at one period of time and then another period of time. For example, when Hitler attacked Poland, at that time, if France and England would start immediately a real war, Hitler would be destroyed quite easily. One French army would be enough to destroy him. Now, 2 years later, when Hitler overran all Europe, and all Europe started to working actually on German Wehrmacht, and they had almost unlimited resources in ammunition and manpower and so on. It was too late. So now French couldn't fight him at all. They capitulated very quickly. England was able to withstand, but they couldn't do anything on the continent for quite a while. Right? So the same thing, what they had in mind in 38, 39, didn't work anymore in 41 and 42, for example.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah. So same thing is happening with Ukraine. If a certain response would be available in 2014, right after Crimea, when it just started, that would be a completely different scenario than to wait for so many years until full invasion. And now there's a lot of hesitance, and the West were preparing Ukraine for the partisan guerrilla war against Russians. They thought that Russians overrun Ukraine very quickly, and Ukraine probably will continue guerrilla war. That's why they were sending stingers and all this.
They were thinking in terms of guerrilla resistance rather than a full-scale conventional resistance.
Something Afghanistan type of resistance. Yeah,
right.
When you have fighters and the stingers and so on. So
today, well, as Mark Twain once remarked, history doesn't repeat itself. It does rhyme, though.
Yes,
and so we are seeing history rhyming once again in the 21st century. And this time, fortunately, the European leaders are good enough students of history, certainly of 20th century history, to realize what is facing them. And they realize that they cannot afford to certainly cannot afford appeasement. and they certainly cannot afford minimal resistance. They must react decisively, and that if Russia is to be stopped, they must be stopped in Ukraine and decisively defeated in Ukraine. And so, therefore, Ukraine becomes the focal point of this entire resistance by the West. If Russia can be defeated decisively, then the Europeans can consolidate, and if Russia is in a state of economic collapse, which there are increasing indications is going to happen once this war ends, then Ukraine can quite freely be admitted into NATO with no significant consequences, and Ukraine will effectively become the eastern bulwark of the NATO alliance, which would be for Ukraine ideal, because Ukraine will need to become that bulwark in order to receive sufficient economic aid to rebuild itself, to take care of all the devastation, because there's hundreds of billions of dollars of damage, and some estimate as much as $1 trillion of damage that would be needed for in order to restore Ukraine to its pre-war state. And this can be done, but right now it cannot be done through diplomacy. It has become eminently clear that diplomacy will not solve this problem. It has to be done after a successful military campaign on the part of Ukraine and the West.
I agree. Do you remember during the 2022 and even a year later, at that time, Macron and this German lady, what was her name? Merkel. Remember that they were calling almost daily to Putin, and what they were asking him to stop the war, or to do what was the reasons that they were calling him almost daily. It reminds me very similar to what Trump did during this year. He didn't probably learn from Macron, and
he should have. he should have. They said maybe he thought that he was a better negotiator. That who knows, but it has become eminently clear to the current Trump administration that negotiation simply isn't going to do it.
But you see, for negotiations, you need two partners who are apart, but with skillful strategy, you can bring them a little bit closer and so on. But you see, as you said, there are irreconcilable differences between Russian position and Ukrainian. So how you can negotiate or even dream of negotiations in such a polarized situation?
You can't. You have to say, well, I'm sorry. Of course, you realize this means war, and we're going to have war until one side decides it's just not worth the cost. And in this case, that is what has to happen in the Russian-Ukrainian war. They have to be stopped decisively. And fortunately for Ukraine and the West so far, the military correlation of forces, and certainly the economic correlation of forces, are both moving in favor of Ukraine. And so, and the Russians, as much as their propagandists would like to deny that reality, reality is imposing itself ever more forcefully upon the situation. So right now, it is simply a matter of persistence, and I would say we watch this in the next coming few days and week or so, the progress of the Zapad 25 exercise between Russia and Belarus. Watch it very carefully to make sure that they don't somehow transition into an active military campaign against Poland, which would most definitely widen this to a full-scale European war.
You know that Poland completely closed its border with Belarus, and Russia is asking Poland to immediately reopen the border. Why Russia cares so much about the border between Poland and Belarus?
We're planning to conduct our offensive through there. Why did you close your border? Well, because we know what you want. We know what you want to do.
And what's interesting, before we finish, I'd like to mention that there are now talk between Poland and Ukraine completely support each other against drones from Russia. And I think if there is a prevailing opinion that it's impossible to rely on U.S. As a NATO Article 5 issue and all that stuff, there might be a creation of a new alliance between Ukraine, Poland, and other willing country participate. I'm
There's
pretty
nothing that prohibits those bilateral agreements from being made.
absolutely, and then that so-called Article 5 would
It
have
becomes
to
irrelevant.
be a real, no, they may call it Article 75 or any other name, but it has to be a real TIS that any country that would attack one of the countries of this new, hopefully, alliance will be well aware of the consequences. Jonathan, thank you very much for today's program, and looking forward to see you on Tuesday, same place, same time, and have
Yes.
a great weekend.
That you do the same. God bless America.
Yeah, God bless Ukraine and Canada and
There you go.
everybody else.
There you go.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.